Am I getting too much protein or too little protein? What is the right type of protein? Are some protein sources better than others? How do we know which proteins are better? How much protein should I eat if I'm a bodybuilder? And are plant sources okay in this case? If I'm on a calorie-restricted diet, will I be able to build muscle if I eat enough protein? Will I get fat if I eat too much protein? What are the best sources if I'm vegan or aging person? You need to see this video because I've condensed all the best science-based information to help you answer some of these questions related to protein. Hi, my name is Dr. Sebely Pal, and I'm a professor in bariatric medicine. I've published over 90 papers in peer-reviewed journals in my career and received funding to do clinical trials in nutrition and chronic diseases. I've also coached thousands of people and tried many diets myself. Therefore, I know that people have trouble getting their heads around dietary protein. And part of this reason is due to the fact that there seems to be a huge debate, even by so-called experts, about how much protein we really need to eat and what type. Another reason is that if you do a search on the internet, there seems to be different numbers popping up all the time. And unfortunately, this has caused a lot of confusion. I don't know why there's such an argument, because there really is some solid research in this area, which I will present. In part 2 of this video series, I'm going to explain what the science says about how much protein we need to eat on a daily basis. However, the most important thing I want you to get out of this video is that these recommendations are not to be generalized for everyone. It has to be modified and put in context for you as an individual and your lifestyle. To make more sense about what I'm going to talk about today, have a look at last week's video, which is part 1 of this video series, where I looked at the relationship between dietary protein and your metabolic health. So how do we know how much protein to eat on a daily basis? Well, when you do an internet search and try to find out how much protein you need, you see a general reference called the RDA, or the recommended dietary allowance, which suggests eating 8 grams of dietary protein per kilogram body weight. Now, this low number of 0.8 grams was generated as a minimum amount of protein one needs to eat to prevent a protein deficiency, which can lead to fatigue, hair loss, edema, muscle weakness, slow wound healing, and therefore 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight is a minimum amount you need to eat to prevent all this degeneration. In a sense, this is the minimum amount needed to maintain physiological functions for someone who probably is bedridden or someone who's lying around all day doing nothing. And most of us don't lie around all day and do nothing. Let me just say, it may be what we need to survive, but not to thrive. And who wants to just survive? Remember, 50% of our bodies is composed of muscle. It is the scaffolding of our body. So we need to do whatever we can to maintain this structure at all costs, or we will become frail. But proteins are also the essential fundamental building blocks in our body, not just for muscles, but for skin, hair, and some hormones. So in order for your body to function optimally, you need to give it what it needs. I don't know about you, but I want to flourish being 58 years old with my hormones, my healthy hair, my skin and nails. And I also want to continue to succeed in my long-term weight loss goals and maybe even gain some muscles. And so this recommendation is definitely not going to be enough for the majority of us if we really want to be healthy, active, or have some basic exercise regime. And it's definitely not going to be enough for people who do higher intensity exercise, let alone athletes or bodybuilders. So if this is the case, then most people may not be consuming enough protein on a daily basis to be really healthy, because these sorts of low numbers are being broadcasted in the internet. Well, what does the science say? Numerous research studies actually suggest that adults should eat anywhere from 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And this doesn't seem to matter if you're male or female between the ages of 18 to 65 years old. But this is almost twice the amount that the RDA recommends to eat. The average moderately active person probably needs closer to 1.6 for your body to thrive. I think it's a good middle ground. However, I guess if you're really sedentary and at a desk job all day, you might be able to get away with 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, but you definitely would not be building any muscles with such low intake. Remember, muscles are the metabolic powerhouse in our bodies. It helps us burn energy all day long and keep our metabolic rate high. And the two biggest drivers for muscle protein synthesis is one, stimulating the muscle like doing exercise, or two, eating dietary protein. And honestly, muscle responds to exercise, such as resistance training, more than it does to diet. Exercise probably has a 70% of the effect on healthy muscle, and diet probably has 25% on muscle development. So basically, it's really important to exercise for good metabolic health. So now that I've framed the importance of muscle for our energy, vitality, and strength, in the next bit of this video, I want you to evaluate or gauge what end of the spectrum of the protein intake recommendations of 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight applies to you. And the reason I say this is because there's many scenarios about your lifestyle where you might need closer to 1.6 or even more. For example, if you're overweight or obese, or if you're trying to lose weight through a calorie deficit, or you're a serious bodybuilder on steroids, if you're a vegan, or if you're aging. And I'll come back to the last three at the end of the video. I think you'll find some surprising information about how age 40 is a new 65 when it comes to muscle health. Now, these numbers like 1.6 kilogram has also been based on men and women who are relatively healthy. So if you're overweight and obese, you can calculate this intake based on your goal weight. And in the second scenario, if you're trying to lose weight and you've reduced your calories and you're not lifting weights, then it's been shown by research that you will definitely lose your muscle mass. When this happens, of course, your metabolic rate will drop and you'll be losing the weight loss battle. So what's the point, really? Been there, done that. See my last video to get a full explanation about this. The bottom line is, if you're not lifting weights, it is really hard to grow muscles when you're on a diet. The best case scenario is that you're just going to try to minimize the loss by eating close to 1.6 or even a bit more like 1.8, especially if you're younger, like in your 20s. However, if you're on a calorie deficit or a diet but lifting weight, you may not lose muscle if you eat the minimum of 1.6 grams or higher, just to keep the muscle mass that you do have. In this scenario, you may not lose much muscle, but you probably won't grow your muscles either. Therefore, it's better to be on the safe side and eat a little bit more protein at the expense of dietary carbs and fat when you're on a diet, just to keep your metabolic rate from dropping. You're definitely not going to get fat by eating a bit more protein, because it's actually very difficult to store protein as body fat compared to eating dietary carbohydrates and fat. Before I go any further, I need to say that there is a common misunderstanding that all proteins are equal. In fact, this is not true. All protein sources are not equal in their ability to help muscle build and repair. Let me say that these recommendations of 1.2 to 1.6 are dependent on the fact that you're getting at least half of your daily protein from sources that have a protein quality of above 90%. Now, what do I mean by that? The protein quality of a food source is usually related to two important criteria. Its amino acid profile, meaning what kind of building blocks make up the protein, and its bioavailability, or the availability to the body after digestion and absorption. Now, proteins are made up of 20 amino acids, and 9 of these are essential, which means your body can't make it, so it has to get it from food. So if you look at this chart, you can see whey protein isolate is about 100, and all the animal proteins have a really high score. This is because they contain all 9 of the essential amino acids. Therefore, they're known as complete sources. So meat, chicken, fish, egg, dairy products are high quality sources. This is also because animal meats have an amino acid ratio that is quite similar to human meat, which means you're consuming protein in the same ratio approximately that you have in your own body. So excellent or high protein quality has score of 100. Good protein quality scores about from 75 to 99, and low protein quality is below 75%, which are coming from more of the plant sources, or what we call incomplete sources, since they are missing some of the 9 essential amino acids and they have lower quantities of them. For example, rice is deficient in lysine, beans lack methionine. Nuts, legumes, beans, lentils, whole grains all fall into this category. Generally, those who are vegans are usually getting their protein sources from these lower quality proteins. And this is why most people automatically believe there is no way you can meet your dietary requirements if you're a vegan. But this is not quite true. If you're a vegan, it is recommended that you boost the recommendations to say about 1.8 to 2.0 grams of dietary protein per kilogram body weight per day. So that's like about 20% markup. In this situation, we need not just to look at the protein quality, but the protein quantity, because we need the right amount and the type of amino acids for vital body functions. It's sort of a no-brainer, the way that you would compensate for lower protein quantities of essential amino acids is you just eat more beans and lentils. And because plant-based proteins often have one limiting amino acid, it is the reason why vegetarians and vegans are recommended to diversify their protein sources in their diet to provide them with all 9 essential amino acids. And what I mean by this is if you combine several of the incomplete proteins together in a meal, then you form a complete protein. For example, when beans are combined with brown rice, they become a complete protein to supply sufficient variety of amino acids to meet your dietary needs. So this is why everybody around the world, from India, Caribbean, Southeast Asia, mix a number of incomplete plant proteins to form a complete protein. So they eat a mixture of beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. One other main advantage of including plant proteins in your diet is that they're very good sources of dietary fiber, vitamins, and minerals, which also have a beneficial health effect. Another interesting plant protein source is soya. Soy protein isolate has a quality score of 0.98, which is very close to whey protein isolate, which has a score of 1. So this can be a great alternative for people who can't tolerate dairy whey protein supplements. Often they have to buy really expensive, hard-to-lyse whey protein isolate products, and even then they don't tolerate it. However, if you use a soy protein isolate, you may just have to have more of it. About 25 grams of whey protein isolate is equivalent to about 32 grams of soy protein isolate in its leucine content. Interestingly, in recent years, a new protein called mycoprotein has been manufactured from fungi or mushrooms. It's regarded as a complete protein due to having all 9 essential amino acids and having a protein quality score of 0.996. The fermentation process of mycoprotein is similar to what we know is used to create beer, and it results in a doughy mixture which is meat-like texture that has a high protein and fiber content, which is why it's usually sold as a meat replacement product that's available in a variety of forms like cutlets, burgers, patties, and strips, and it's marketed under the brand name called Corn, and it's sold around the world, like in 17 countries. Clinical studies have also found that it can help control blood lipids, blood sugar, as well as appetite. Vegans also have access to meat substitutes like tofu and tempeh and texturized vegetable protein or TVP, and of course Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger. But remember, all these are processed foods, and even though it's recommended that vegans get their protein sources from whole foods, it may be difficult to get the ideal amount, which is why supplementing with plant protein blends like soya, pea, or mycoprotein can be a strategy to get their intake of complete dietary proteins and capture all the essential amino acids for optimal muscle health. So getting adequate protein, being a vegan for good muscle health and metabolic health isn't a problem. You just have to be more vigilant. And vegetarians, fortunately, have a bunch of dairy choices available to them, which are complete proteins and highly bioavailable. I want to talk about a really interesting study that was done comparing plant proteins to animal proteins for muscle growth. Hamilton conducted a study that probably surprised a lot of people. They examined the effects of either a plant-based dietary protein versus a mixed diet on changes in muscle health and strength in healthy young men undertaking resistance training. They found that the plant-based group supplemented with soy protein had the same muscle gain and strength gains compared with the young men that were in the omnivorous group supplemented with the whey protein. So it just highlights that as long as you're getting enough protein, then it doesn't matter whether it's a plant-based or animal-based source. Even though I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian, I don't know why so many people attack plant protein consumption when it's perfectly okay to get everything you require from this type of source. Like I said, you just have to be keenly aware compare the amount of protein you're getting in every day, and making sure you're eating a variety of plant sources like beans, lentils, chickpea, tofu, and not just relying on salads and grains alone. Even though I've said that plant-based proteins can do the job if you're a vegan for good muscle health, but if you aren't one, it can be more efficient and easier to eat what you need from animal proteins. And even supplementing with soy or whey protein powders, irrespective of your dietary choices, is a great way to bypass some of the potential issues of not getting enough from whole food sources. Now that I've spoken about the quality of proteins, I want to come back to explain some of the scenarios I mentioned earlier about this 1.6 grams of protein intake per kilogram body weight may need to be adjusted if you're a bodybuilder or an aging person. If you're a serious bodybuilder, then you can go up to 2.2 to 2.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. For example, if you're trying to bulk, then 1.8 to 2.2 is probably enough. But if you're trying to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, or what we call recomp, then I would say you would need to go 1.8 to 2.2 grams of body weight. And if you're cutting, or in other words, you're trying to lose just fat, then you can go as high as 2.7 to make sure you don't lose muscle because you're not getting enough from calories. However, if you are a serious bodybuilder and on gear like testosterone, then you can eat up to 3 grams of protein per kilo body weight because your muscle synthesis goes up a lot in this situation. You just need more protein to build this muscle. But remember, there's a point of diminishing returns once you start getting up that high. And if you're thinking, wow, this is really high, well, there really isn't any good research evidence to show that this amount of protein intake in a healthy person would cause kidney damage or have any negative effects on renal function or bone density. Now, most of you are going to be surprised by my next statement that it may be debatable at what exact point in life muscles start to age, but research has shown that a gradual 30 to 50% decline in muscle mass occurs between the ages of 40 and 80, with a rapid decline after the age of 50. Therefore, the aging adult is used to refer to a person age 40 and older. Wow, that's pretty harsh, isn't it? Even by my standards. So if you're aging, or in other words, over 40, you need to be more vigilant about your protein intake. And it's thought that you might need to increase dietary protein even in your early 30s in order to mitigate any of this muscle loss that's going to start at around your 40s. I know, it just sounds crazy, doesn't it? So if you're aging, or in other words, over 40, it is suggested that 1.6 grams per kilogram amount should be a good start. And if you're thinking, why does this happen so early in your life? Well, it's because as we age, our bodies become less responsive to the signals that promote muscle growth, and we have more trouble getting those amino acids into our muscle that we need for protein. Interestingly, an interventional study showed that adults aged between 55 and 77 that ate 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight was associated with significant decreased thigh muscle in just 14 weeks. Can you imagine what would happen if you continued to eat like this for a year or two? You'd probably become frail quite quickly. So this just goes to show you how quickly you can lose your muscle mass if you're following the current RDAs, and it's way below what an aging adult would need. Although I'm a big fan of whole food protein sources, supplementation is something you can do when you're a bit older and you have a low appetite or you have difficulty chewing because of bad teeth or swallowing. I think this is where it may be easier to drink a whey or soy-based protein shake so that you can meet your daily requirements. Now, I want to say a few more things before I finish up, which are quite important. First of all, when it comes to eating the right amount of protein, it's just not black and white. Fortunately, we have to stop looking at humans as machines and have a more individualized approach. Not one shoe will fit everyone. You probably have to look at your total intake over a week. And if you don't get enough protein one day, you're suddenly not just going to go break down all your muscle. This just doesn't make sense on a survival standpoint, as our ancestors sometimes didn't eat for days at a time. They wouldn't suddenly break down all their muscle in a few days from not eating, because this would mean they wouldn't be able to go hunt for food. I think it's helpful to understand that you are constantly breaking down and building your protein throughout the day. For example, when you're lifting weights or you're doing certain types of exercise, you'd be breaking down more proteins. But if you were sleeping were eating, you would be making more proteins. So you have to apply some common sense to how you approach this and ask yourself, did I work out 2 hours in the gym lifting weights really hard? Then if so, I might need a bit more protein today to repair my muscles. And if I was lying around all day doing nothing, then I probably wouldn't need as much as the days I'd work out. However, I think the 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight is a really good middle ground for most people. And you don't necessarily have to go above this number to get more muscle growth, as we're not all bodybuilders. But I do think it's also important to get enough protein for your body requirements, because if you don't get it through your diet and your body needs it, then the protein will be taken from the breakdown of muscle fibers, which is terrible for your metabolism, hormones, hair, and skin. And this is because, unlike fat and glucose, our bodies do not generally store proteins. Any excess amino acids are usually used as a source of energy. And yes, you can eat your whole day's worth of protein in one sitting. We were wrong when we thought we had to split out our protein intake through 3 or 4 meals in the day. So watch my video from a few weeks ago regarding how much protein we can eat all at once. But if you do split up your protein throughout the day, then you need a minimum of 30 grams of dietary protein per meal to stimulate protein synthesis, or in other words, 3 grams of amino acid leucine. Below this number, it's really hard to activate muscle protein synthesis. For example, eating 2 eggs, which is 14 grams of protein, is not going to move the needle. And yes, you can absolutely still build muscle when you're doing intermittent fasting, especially if you're getting enough protein and total calories. So you have to look at last week's video, which is part 1 of this video series. I looked at the relationship between dietary protein and your metabolic rate, weight management, lean muscle mass, glucose control, satiety, and overall health. But to really get the results you want, to make sure you come back to next week's video, where I'm going to talk about the science behind walking and fat loss. I think you'll be surprised when you hear some of the research studies on this.